Okay, thanks folks. We're ready to get started with our webinar today. My name is Justine and I am the Bike Skills Coordinator here at Bike Victoria Society. I'm joined today by Todd Kalanick and Adam Kruper, and they'll introduce themselves after we kind of let a few more folks shuffle in and arrive. We're expecting like a big turnout today, which is really awesome. So while we're waiting, I'm just going to throw up a couple questions and see if folks can answer these honestly. The first question is, have you registered for Winter Go By Bike Day yet? All right, looks like got most people voting. If you're just arriving, feel free to click a question, click an answer, to this question. This isn't like a shaming thing, we're just curious. And maybe I'll close that for now. And I can share what folks have been saying. So we have 72% folks saying that they have registered, which is great. For those who haven't, I really encourage you to log your rides on gobybikebc.ca. It helps us look really good when we have more people participating. Okay, so I have another question. Since it is Winter Go By Bike Day, hope everyone's on their bikes, even though they're at home or on this webinar. This is the second question. Where are you most likely to go by bike today? Give folks some time to vote. Sorry, this is very Victoria specific, I just realized. Thank you folks who are joining us from other places in British Columbia or from around the globe. But yeah, we're the Bike Victoria Society, so I didn't quite think that through. Let's more folks vote on this one. 10 more seconds. All right, I'm gonna close that. Very cool. Okay, so it looks like a lot of folks are cycling to work or school today, maybe shopping, gym, cafe, restaurant. No one's going to the beach this cold day. No one's at the park. And a lot of folks are taking the Galloping Goose and our other multi-use paths. And I wonder what that other is. I'd be curious to find out where other folks are biking today. If you want to share other places that you're biking, there is a question box located on the right side of your screen, which will be useful for the webinar, but also if you want to share where you think you're going to be going today on your bike, we're curious. Later in the webinar, we have a Q&A scheduled as well. So if there's something that we didn't go over, please put your questions in the box and we'll get to those at the end of the webinar. We're leaving about 20 minutes for like just question and answer period. So that's really nice. And I have one more question and then we'll get started. How did you find out about this webinar? Just kind of a general wondering. Leave that open for 10 more seconds. All right. And it looks like most folks signed up via our newsletter. That's awesome. Our coworker James is our newsletter master. He's always diligently putting out stuff, and it's really, really great to see that that's how we're actually spreading our news. Social media, again, with the other, would love to know what other ways folks are learning about our webinars. So there's 30 people here. That's really exciting. I think we should get started because we only have an hour. Like I said, my name is Justine. I work at the Bike to Work Society. Actually, it doesn't really make sense because it's virtual, but to my left, I have Todd Kalanick. He's our bike skills instructor, and he has been cycling, I think, for 6 years, or maybe even more, all year round, winter, summer, spring. And also we have Adam Cooper. He's the executive director of the Bike Victoria Society, and also a winter cyclist, all-year cyclist. We are located in Victoria. We serve the greater Victoria area. We've been doing bike skills and Go by Bike Week, Winter Go by Bike Day for 25 years, more than 25 years now. And we're really excited to have folks from outside of Victoria coming to this webinar, thanks to the folks at gobybikebc.ca. Other things that I wanted to share really quickly, which is exciting, are some of the Winter Go by Bike Day stats. And in Greater Victoria, we have 904 riders today, people have registered, and that's about 777 kilometers biked already, and that's 199 teams. We're doing really well. This is really exciting. We were sad because we couldn't have our celebration station like we usually do Winter Go by Bike Day, but that didn't seem to stop people from riding their bikes anyway today. That's really awesome. Really exciting thing that we have set up for this webinar is we have a prize. So folks who are registered, who are attending today, they're automatically entered to win our webinar prize pack, which is a free Go by Bike buff, one of those like neck warmers, which we'll be learning about in this webinar today, a Bike to Work Week t-shirt, a set of lights, and a set of tire levers. So like fingers crossed, it's you who is the winner. We'll find out at the end of the webinar, and we'll send you an email if you won. A few questions or a few things that we need to go over before we get started. The webinar is being recorded, so if you have missed anything, if there are any technical difficulties, we're going to post it, so don't worry about that. My only real tech advice for technical difficulties is to close the whole app, whole webinar, and then re-enter with the same link that you got here with. Like I said, anything that you missed will be posted on our website. We'll send you the link to the recording as well after the webinar, so don't worry. Another thing is that we were really lucky. Adam has created a winter cycling booklet, I guess. It's like a pamphlet that's posted also on our website in our resource library. So if you feel like you don't want to take notes, we have all the resources available, and we'll have the link for that at the end of the webinar as well. I think that's everything I wanted to go over. It's a lot of information. Anything else that folks have questions about? Like I said, put it in the question box that's available on the right side of your screen in the kind of like panel bar. And yeah, we should have lots of time for questions at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I'm going to let Adam and Todd introduce themselves, and then we are going to get started.
Great. Want to kick it off, Todd?
Sure. So Todd Kalanick. So I'm a bike skills instructor with the Bike to Work Society, and been an enthusiastic cyclist for a bit over 50 years now. And in terms of winter riding, I've ridden on the prairies and in Victoria here. I once went 6 years riding to and from work every day without ever taking my car once. So that was all kinds of imaginable weather, and I hope to share a few of the lessons learned I had through that process.
Thanks, Todd. My name is Adam Kruger. I'm the executive director of the Bike Victoria Society. And before I started this job, I lived in a little town called Thunder Bay in Ontario, which is in northwestern Ontario, close to the Manitoba border. And as you can see by the photo, there's about 5 months of snowy winter there. And that was the day, I think it was about -35. And I love cross-country skiing. And only temperatures around -40 will stop me. And so as a joke, I took a couple photos. But just like Todd, I ride year round, no matter the weather. And so it's been about 20 years for me. And most of those 20 years were in Thunder Bay, riding in the snow. And when I was there, I was the mobility coordinator. So my job was to implement all the cycling infrastructure and do education. And one of the little projects was developing an all-weather cycling guide, which Justine referred to. And so rather than see it banished to the internet dungeons, we've revived it and posted it online for you to check out. So I think Todd and I are both really excited to be able to share some of the things we've learned over the years. And let's get started. So year-round cycling, that's what this is about. You know, we talk about Greater Victoria or even Vancouver. We're dealing with more wet weather, wet, cold, windy, but we also know that there are northern communities who, where people are really enthusiastic about cycling, where we know that getting snow in the winter is a real reality. And so Todd and I are going to do our best to kind of cover both topics because there are some distinctions, but there's also a lot of overlap. Is there anything you'd like to add, Todd?
No, that's great. Thanks, Adam.
Okay. So I guess the first and most important topic is clothing. So you want to kick it off?
Well, sure. So, you know, a lot of my experience in Victoria has been primarily in wet weather. And of course, you know, a few of the obvious things. I mean, it's really helpful to have a rainproof jacket. And again, you know, depending on the how cold it is and how windy it is, it sort of dictates how thick the jacket might be. It's also great to have one that's highly visible, and there's a good illustration here, both in terms of color and especially having some reflective material because it gets dark so much. And really, at the peak of winter in Victoria, you're riding to work in the dark and you're coming home in the dark. So I didn't see it to be an excuse for anyone. And then underneath that, it's really helpful to have lots of layers. And again, when you ride to work in the morning, it might be 1 or 2 degrees and it might be super cold. And then when you ride home in the evening, it might have gone up to 6 or 7 degrees. And of course, the more you ride, the warmer you get. So it's great to be able to take off layers. And it's also good to remember that if you feel a little bit cold when you leave home, that's what you want to see, because as you ride, of course, you're going to get a bit warmer and through the process of working on your bike there. So
yeah, absolutely. And so we'll talk a little bit now about some of the key areas that you kind of need to focus on, because as Todd has kind of already spoken to, stuff like your legs and your torso and your arms, because they're working and because you're working cardiovascularly, they tend to get warm pretty quickly. But the areas where you need to be a bit more careful are places such as your hands and your head and your feet. So there's a really fun little saying, and it is, if your feet are cold, put a hat on. and the kind of the thinking behind that is our heads tend to emit 65% of the heat out of our body. So that's where we lose most of our heat. So if your hands are cold or your feet are cold, then a good place to start is protecting your head a little bit more. And so, you know, someone who's watching this webinar is going to win a buff, which is great. And so buffs are very versatile. They're basically tubes of fabric, and you can put them on your neck, or you can fold them over your head so they act almost as a balaclava. So they do a great job of protecting your neck and your head, and they also help block out wind. And so, you know, if you're just looking for light protection because you find that you know, your aerodynamic, extremely well ventilated helmet is doing too good of a job, you can put a thin tube under there, or you can use a buff to help cut out that wind. It makes a huge difference. So right now, I think the temperature is hovering somewhere around like 0 and 3 degrees, and that's how it's been all week. So every day I've been putting on a very thin tube under my helmet, and it's been perfect. And then there's also helmet covers. You can put a helmet cover over your head. Helmet does the same thing, and it works really well. And if you're really enthusiastic, especially for places where you're dealing more with snow, winter, gusts of wind, getting a dedicated winter helmet can be huge. Dedicated winter helmets have got fewer vents, so there's less air coming through, but they also usually have earmuffs built in, so your ears stay nice and warm, and the liner inside them is also insulated. So you've got fewer air vents, plus you've got the insulation on your head, and they're really nice. And you get a higher end winter helmet, and it'll have vents that you can open and close, so you can really fine tune the temperature in your head. And then one other thing that you can do, especially if you're dealing with lots of wind, is get a nice pair of sunglasses or snow goggles. And it makes a huge difference in terms of just keeping your eyes warm and your face warm.
And the other comment that I'd make there, Adam, is in Victoria where there's always rain, it's also great to wear basically a baseball cap or something underneath your helmet, because the visor will help to keep the raindrops off of your face or off of your glasses if you happen to wear glasses. So I find just, I have a rainproof cap that I'll put underneath my helmet, and that really increases my enjoyment significantly. So that's another thing to think about.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Yeah, Todd, do you want to tackle some handwear?
Yeah, sure. So there's an illustration here of 3 different kinds of handwear. There's a pair of lighter gloves, and actually I do own those very gloves and have found them to be extremely comfortable. There's an illustration of some basic mitts, and then on the far right-hand side are what are called lobster mitts. And those are probably what I wore in the most extreme cold, although you don't often get that requirement in Victoria here. But it is really good to have a number of different sort of weights of gloves and things. And again, you can kind of adjust that depending on whether it's 10 degrees, 2 degrees, or -5 degrees, and make sure that your hands are always comfy.
Yeah, just like wearing like your jackets and your pants. If you can layer your gloves, that also works really well. So as Todd was saying, those Gavia gloves are really nice. They're thin. They're water resistant. They block out wind. And then having a pair of an over mitt that you can put on top of that, if the temperature does get quite cold, is a really nice thing to have. And then next, of course, is feet. Feet are obviously really important. The biggest thing, at least around here, is keeping your feet dry. And actually, Todd, do you know the name of those? A lot of people are wearing those boots that are waterproof, and you kind of slip them on and slip them off.
Well, when I was riding in the winter, when I ride in the winter, I have a pair of dedicated winter cycling shoes that are made by Specialized, and they incorporate both the gaiter, so sort of the Gore-Tex over thing, in addition to the directly with the shoe itself. So I didn't have to mess around with 2 things just to go out and ride in the winter. The other thing I mentioned is to keep your feet dry in the winter. One of the best things you can do is have a bike with fenders, because you get much more water, going up onto your feet from your tires than you do from the sky. So, but yeah, there's a number of different things shown here. Wool socks are great because they're warm even if they're wet. An example of somebody putting on a plastic bag underneath over their socks and inside their shoes, which also works pretty well. And again, the Gore-Tex gaiters that go over your shoes are terrific, or if you can afford them, winter cycling shoes with the gaiter built in.
Yeah, no, I agree. If you can afford winter cycling shoes, that's awesome. I think one of the reasons why I showed the plastic bag is it does 2 things. It keeps your feet dry, and the other thing it does is it helps block wind from getting onto your foot. And especially for colder climates, your feet are swinging around there at 80 to 100 RPM, and it creates a lot of wind. And so that little layer actually makes a huge difference in terms of keeping your feet toasty. But I agree, like if you can get Gore-Tex shoes or dedicated cycling shoes, it's really the way to go. So as Todd was kind of implying, if you're serious about biking in the wintertime, having a bike that's set up for winter riding can make a huge difference. And yeah, I agree. One of the best things you can do is get a set of full coverage fenders. So that's what this photo here shows. It shows fenders that do a full wrap around all the way down to the bottom bracket. And then on the front, it goes all the way down to basically even below the quick release. These full fenders will stop water from spraying up your back, but it'll also stop water from spraying up between your legs and all over your feet, not only in the back, but also in the front. It makes a huge difference. And I think one of the other things that we like to let people know is When you're dealing with wet weather or snowy weather, that bike is going to be taking a bit of abuse. It's going to be getting exposed to elements that are, water, salt, dirt, sand is hard on the bike. It's hard on the components, and because it causes rust, it causes premature wear. So if you can make your bike, if first of all, if you can find yourself a cheaper bike that you're not too worried about the wear and tear, that makes a big difference. And then two, if you can simplify that bike mechanically, for example, not having a front derailleur, or if you can keep it down to a single speed, or if you can have an internal rear hub, like internal gear hub in the back. Internal gear hubs are sealed, and they're not as getting salt on them doesn't impact them the same way that derailleurs get impacted. And one of the things Todd and I also spoke about was brake systems. So choosing a brake system that's fairly simple. Disc brakes are, there's pluses and minuses. Like for example, with disc brakes offer superior braking power in wet conditions, and they offer more power overall than other braking systems, but they're also more mechanically complex. And so while that doesn't really matter in a wet environment because they're built to withstand lots of water, if you're dealing with an environment where there's lots of salt and sand, that can result in corrosion in a disc caliper that has many small moving parts. So it can be a little bit more of a challenge. So something with a simpler brake, like a V brake or a cantilever brake, can have maintenance advantages. Is there anything else? Yeah.
Well, the only other comment I'd add is that older mountain bikes are very popular. So rigid mountain bikes, the older sort of, Rocky Mountain type bikes and things like that are very popular. And you can pick them up used for a few $100s, and that way you can avoid wrecking your good bike. So I used to, have a dedicated winter bike that's, 20 years old or something. And then that way, if it does take a bit of a beating, then it's, nothing to cry over. So.
Yeah, very much agree. Yeah, and there's other little things you can do to make your ride a little safer. One thing that you could do, especially if you're dealing with conditions where you might encounter black ice or snow that you find slippery, is you can attach a rack and have pannier bags. That'll lower your center of gravity and make you more stable when things are a little sketchy. And I know Todd and I are both really passionate about this. We're both very passionate about making sure you've got good lighting on that bike. It does make a difference. And a little thing you can do is just carry a waterproof seat cover with you. It's a little thing, but in a climate that rains on a regular basis, it sure is nice to have a dry seat when you go for your bike ride.
Absolutely.
So Todd, do you want to handle tires?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's also appropriate to have tires that are suitable for whatever environment you're going to actually ride in. Here in Victoria, we get primarily rain. So as long as people have, what I call touring kind of tires, then generally speaking, they work very well. As an illustration at the bottom of mountain bike tires, your typical mountain bike tire works out well because it's got a bit of tread on it. On the left, cyclocross tires also tend to work very well during the winter. I used to have a pair of studded tires, so when there was black ice and I knew it, then I'd ride with studded tires, and even though they're a bit heavier, they definitely give you an extra degree of security riding in icy conditions. And then on the right, which has of course become very popular these days, is the fat bike, and people that are in snowier climates can now ride in conditions that only the most robust could have imagined 5 or 10 years ago. So that's also another option if you live in a place that gets a lot of snow during the winter.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, back in Thunder Bay, I actually had a pair of studded tires, and for when the conditions got icy, it was a godsend. They were amazing. And one of the things that people often ask about, they're like, if you're a bit more new to commuting cycling, you're like, oh, why are bike tires so expensive? And why would I want to get an expensive tire over a cheap tire? And one of the interesting things about more expensive tires is they tend to, and one thing you should think about is getting a tire that, especially if you're dealing with wet conditions or you're dealing with snowy conditions or possible black ice, get a more expensive tire that has a softer rubber, because a softer rubber tends to be grippier. And so it'll give you better grip in different conditions. So softer rubber tires tend to be a bit more expensive, but they give you that extra grip that makes you feel safer and more assured.
That's right, inexpensive bike with good tires.
And, yeah, inexpensive bike, but the tires are worth the same amount as the bike itself. Yeah.
Yeah, no, just two of the things to really consider here to ride safely during the winter. So during the winter, one of the big distinguishing things, of course, is it's very dark. And in order to see and be seen, there's sort of two components. One of them is having reflective clothing of one kind or another. So on the right-hand side, we see an illustration of, the same cyclist, one of them wearing reflective clothing and one of them not. And it really shows you how much of a difference it does make. And I rode for years and years on the Lochside Trail, which has many dark unlit sections through the trees. And even having a tiny bit of reflective material in your clothing really just made a huge difference. And that's true whether you're a pedestrian or a cyclist. And I had, ninjas that I avoided hitting just because they had a small square of reflective material in their shoes, for example. And it just makes a massive difference and quite inexpensive. And at the bottom, it shows a jacket that's entirely reflective. And again, if you're shopping for a new jacket or something, that is something that's quite prevalent these days. And then, of course, in BC, common sense would say that at night you should have a headlight and a tail light. But in BC, it's also the law. So again, if you don't have a red rear light and a white front light, then it is also possible for you to get a violation for that. But the biggest reason to do it is because that's incredibly important in keeping you safe.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. I 100% agree. And just to add, the company that makes these fully reflective jackets is a company called ProViz, and they make a whole variety of them, and the jackets are also waterproof.
Yep.
And next is lighting recommendations. Want to continue on, Todd? You're doing a great job.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you have to have a white front light. And I guess rule of thumb number one, it needs to be bright enough for you to see where you're going. And again, if you're riding down, city streets with street lights and things, then, that's kind of, you need one level of light. If you're going down regional trails and things like that are completely unlit, then you definitely need a brighter light. Although these days you can get lights that are so bright they can blind everyone, so you do need to also be conscious of that. I would strongly recommend having two lights, and ideally one on your bike and one on your helmet, because the bike on the light on the front of your bike will light up where the bike is going, and the one on your helmet will light up where you're looking. And again, those aren't always the same thing in dark conditions. And again, also, if one of the lights stops working, which rechargeable batteries and all that can certainly run out, then at least you've got a bit of a backup plan and you're not having to ride with no light at all. And I'd also ask people to be incredibly respectful, not using blinking front lights in the dark. I know sometimes people like to do that during the day as a daytime running light, but in the dark it is truly blinding, and I'd be super careful not to do that. And then on the rear lighting, there's lots of good examples or lots of good options available. I just have a little picture there of the Planet Bike Super Flash, which is very common and just takes rechargeable double or AAA batteries. But there's all kinds of things out there that are, anywhere from $20 to $100 that are quite good. I recommend two lights, and again, same kind of rationale. And also, if you have two lights on your bike, one on a high level, one on a low level, it kind of makes you more of a three-dimensional thing. And it makes it easier for motorists or for other riders to figure out that it's somebody riding a bike and, not a car with one burnt out taillight or something. And having a light on your helmet is definitely a good idea. There's, lots of little lights you can easily attach to your helmet, or there's some fancy helmets now, there's a picture one there, that actually have built-in lights. And again, these sorts of things are becoming more common. But again, it's important to be able to see where you're going, and it's important for people to be able to see you. And it's also important for people coming from the side to see you too. And again, so as you kind of think about your reflectors and your lights, any of them that also have a little bit of a side visibility are a great thing. And I used to have the little lights that go on your valve stems, that would be visible when you're riding. And again, they really just help people coming from the side to see that there's somebody riding there.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is this, it's a small detail, is I actually have a set of like cheap doll, you know, those like little silicone front and rear lights you can buy at the dollar store for like $2 a pair. I keep a pair of those in my pannier bag just in case, as you said, Todd, in case for some reason I forget to charge my lights or they're just not working, and I can throw them on in an emergency. But as you say, if you have 2 fronts and 2 rears anyway, the chances of that happening are very low.
Low.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you for that coverage. And next, of course, is winter maintenance, and that's one of the big challenges with riding your bike in wintertime, as I kind of implied before, is it's exposed to harsher elements than what it normally is exposed to. And the better you can maintain your bike, the better you know, it'll last. The less it will cost you in the long run, the better it will run, and the happier your relationship will be with that bike. And so, I mean, there's a few things just to check. I mean, and really the main part that takes the brunt of the abuse is your chain. It's just getting exposed to water, and all the little bushings and all the pivots in there, they just hold water. And as the water sits in there, it just starts to rust your chain. And so, you know, a couple of things that you can do just on a regular basis. Like, let's say if you go for a ride in the rain, when you get home, dry that chain off right away. Just give your bike a quick dry. If you do that, that one thing, that one act, just drying out your chain at the end of that ride, will save you lots of time and money and noisy agony in the long run. And so just cleaning your chain on a regular basis will also just prevent it from getting gunked up. Because one of the other things that happens is when you're riding in a wet environment, that the dirt is also wet, and so it has a tendency to stick to that chain. And then the oil on that chain will tend to hold on to that dirt and that sand, and it will just compound, and your chain will get gummier and gunkier and gunkier. So doing that daily or every second day quick wipe down of that chain will keep it clean and lasting longer. Think of dirt and sand like sandpaper. And so the longer you have that sandpaper grinding away at your gears and your derailleurs and your chain rings, it's just literally eating away at your system. So the better you can clean it, the better your whole bike will last. And of course, as you're drying your chain, you also need to remember to re-lubricate your chain. But I would suggest re-lubricating your chain maybe once a week or once every couple of weeks, depending on how much exposure your chain is getting to tough conditions. Is there anything else you want to add there, Todd, about chains and drivetrain?
Oh, no, I think the chains are kind of bang on the money. And then the other thing that's in the picture here is, you know, brakes and brake pads. And again, brake pads also, for the reasons Adam mentioned, do tend to wear out super quick during the winter, being rubbed up against all the grit and things. I think it's very hard to eliminate squealing or squeaking 100%. I mean, that's something you may have to live with a little bit during the winter, but it's also a good idea to have a look at your brake pads once a week. And if they're wearing down too much, then brake pads are, you know, super cheap to replace and are, of course, just an essential element from a safety point of view.
Yeah, I agree. And actually the photo here, the second one from the right, where it shows the 2 brake arms. The reason why I included that photo is, and this is for the winter riders out there, it's amazing how quickly things rust. And one thing you should do is undo your brakes, whether they're cantilevers or V-brakes, and manually make those arms move in and out, each one individually, and make sure that the arms aren't rusted shut, and make sure the pivots still work, because the bushings do tend to rust, and they do seize. It does happen. So double check those arms and make sure they're still moving. So next is route planning.
So this is the picture. There was an illustration by a local guy who put together all these very fancy looking routes that actually were, you know, look exactly like pictures, and he recorded them through Strava. And so that's something, if one has a fair bit of time on your hand, you could give that a try. So
yeah, when it comes to winter riding, there's just a few key principles we wanted to point out. One of them is that just expect your ride to take a little longer. whether it's, whether it's wet or snowy, give yourself an extra 30% time. That will allow you to, it'll give you the freedom to take it easy when you need to. You don't feel rushed. You don't feel like you need to take any chances, especially if you're going downhill or if you're going around corners. Whatever the situation is, it just gives you that freedom to deal with unexpected situations. One big recommendation, as Todd mentioned, because there's so much darkness in wintertime, try to stay on well-lit streets. It makes a big difference in terms of your safety, or just stay on multi-use trails whenever possible. Again, because people in cars are having a harder time seeing, because often they're also struggling with the conditions. Staying on roads with low traffic volumes is just a good practice. And then, kind of as I mentioned before about giving yourself some extra time, if you can avoid hills and corners on your route, it does make a difference. Again, I'm thinking about the winter situation where you might be encountering black ice. If you're going down a steep hill and you hit your brakes and there's some ice there, there's a potential for slipping. Or if you're turning a corner and there's ice around that corner, there's a potential for slipping. So if you can find a route that's as straight as possible and with the gentlest corners, it's just a way of preventing potential issues. And the other thing that I just noted here is having a bailout plan. And so what I mean by that is, if you have a normal route, and let's say you're comfortable riding on a busy road, it's no big deal for you, but you've been at work all day and you're leaving work and there's a torrential rain, and it's nice to have a secondary route already planned out that is your extra safe route in case of such a situation. Those are just some principles.
Yeah, and I think in many cities, certainly the whole capital region here, all of the buses have bike racks on them. And from a bike maintenance point of view, I tell everybody, make sure that you have bus spare in your toolkit, because there are times where if you have a breakdown in your bike or something happens, throwing your bike onto a bus is always a good plan B or plan C. And of course, if you do have a mechanical problem, if you're a BC Automobile Association member, BCAA will also come out and repair your bike. So that's another thing to think about if you happen to have that coverage. Adam, are you still with us? Adam seems to have frozen for a moment. A couple other comments here while we're waiting for Adam to come back. Calculating extra time, absolutely. I had a commute where it was 25 minutes under very good conditions. And during the winter, it wasn't unusual for that to take 40 minutes or more. So definitely a good idea to allow extra time. The bright streets, absolutely a great idea if you do have access to street lights, and being able to use that to help you to see where you're going. The multi-use trails, again, in some cases you do have to make a bit of a trade-off between how well things are lit and how many cars there are. The multi-use trails at night can be super dark, but again, I found them to be very enjoyable to ride on as long as I had some decent level of lighting. Also mention when it's raining, especially if it's raining heavily, that you probably need twice as much light in the rain is more or less what I calculated, as opposed to riding under dry conditions. And it's just because the ground is wet and it's not reflective. And so therefore you do need more light to effectively see where you're going at night. And just like any other route planning, there's probably several options out there that you could use. Always a good idea to test ride it before. So, go and pre-ride your route on a Sunday and just make sure that you're comfortable with it, so that when it comes time that you need to get to work at a certain time, you're not having to rush. So just another thought to consider there. What I'm going to do, since Adam and Justine appear to have dropped off, I'm just going to try to open the slides and see if I could possibly take over as the presenter. But while I'm doing that, if anyone has questions, please feel free to answer them in the chat box, and I'll see if I can answer some of those. Oh, sorry, we just had Adam appears to be coming back here, so I don't need to find a way to switch over. Here's some,
Sorry about that. Our audio cut out for our internet connection cut out for a second.
yeah, not to worry. Here's some good resources to use from a route planning point of view. Google Maps has improved enormously over the past several years, and from a cycling point of view, now it provides sensible options most of the time. The Capital Region has also published a very helpful bike map, and it'll show you where the latest bike lanes, bike routes, and that sort of thing are. And there's also a green map that's published by Davenport that's updated periodically. That's a good resource as well. And then on the right is bikemaps.org. And again, that's where people go and report various kinds of safety conditions. So if there's places where there's been a lot of collisions or bike thefts or unsafe conditions, that's another thing that you can look at to try to see if people have reported any of those kinds of things on your route. And again, always try it out ahead of time.
Great.
And so the multi-use trails are a great option for a number of reasons. One of them is there's no cars, so that's generally speaking, there's no cars. So, and you will have to also sometimes contend with pedestrians and pets and all kinds of other modes of transport now, but generally speaking, the lack of cars makes up for those other things. On the left, there's an illustration of one of the trestles, and again, one of the cautionary notes I provide to people is when you're riding on any of the bridges or trestles going over water, those will tend to ice up a lot more quickly than other kinds of roads and sidewalks and things, because it has the water evaporating moisture up from the bottom of the deck. The bridges themselves are very thin, so they really don't hold any heat. And so kind of the combination of those two things will result in ice or black ice a lot more quickly than other places. And so just be cautious.
Yeah, I saw a note really quickly. Lana Taves, who's our program manager for our cycling education program, she made a note in the questions box, just noting about route planning. She just said that something to consider, and she's totally right about this. For places that get snow, especially even for in a place that isn't used to getting snow like Victoria, the way the snow plow priority works is that usually bigger roads have priority for snow plowing over residential streets. And so often following a snow, like immediately following a snow, your safest bet is on larger roads. And that's a good point. Yeah, can't argue with that.
And this is a great slide here because it illustrates one of the gems of Victoria, one of the huge areas of progress in the past several years, which are the protected bike lanes. And if those are an option from a routing point of view, I think people will generally find them to be safer and much more comfortable. On the right-hand side, and this has generated a lot of controversy, is in many cases, the bike lanes do seem to get cleared before the streets. And so there have been a bit of a few letters to the editor on that topic, but I think it's great that they're able to keep those clear. And in most cities that do have bike lanes, those are one of the first things to get cleared after snow.
Yeah, and protected bike lanes, they solve the conflict issue, especially after a snowfall, where the roads are narrower because of snow. And so people are fighting for space. And so that obviously causes conflict, especially when a car is trying to overpass you, like go around you right after a snowfall. That they don't have good traction, and they're struggling to get around you, and that can be really sketchy. So kudos to protected bike lanes. They solve problems.
That's right.
Black ice. Black ice is for me. Like probably the worst part. I can deal with snow, I can deal with rain, I can deal with puddles, no big deal. Black ice for me is the scariest because it's hard to see, you don't expect it, it's slippery as all heck. It's like hitting a pile of oil, and so that we just have to give a lot of consideration of black ice. So Todd, you want to talk about how to be aware, how to keep an eye out for black ice?
Yeah, one of the great things we have here in Victoria that I use a lot from a commuting point of view is victoriaweather.ca, which is a set of weather stations that the University of Victoria has installed at many of the public schools and other kinds of institutions. So, for example, I rode through the Blenkinsop Valley, and the Lake Hill School was very close to the trail. So to look at the weather for that, you know, for example, it'll tell you whether the temperature at that particular place is above or below 0. And even though the temperature in the city as a whole may have been 2 or 3 degrees, sometimes it would be, you know, -1 in the Blenkinsop Valley. So that means you had to be kind of extra diligent in looking for black ice. So that's a good resource if there happens to be a weather station along your route. You know, just take 30 seconds and look there in the morning, and if it's below zero, you know, to be extra cautious.
Yeah, so for me, when it comes to dealing with black ice, obviously I avoid it whenever possible. But if for some reason I have to ride on black ice, I mean, here's an example of where you don't expect black ice, but it will appear. Let's say you're on a multi-use trail and you're riding along, and it's, you know, in the middle of the day, early in the morning, you're riding along, and the trail is wet, but the sun is shining on it, which is keeping the moisture damp. But then you ride to a section where there's a building casting a large shadow on top of that trail. That is probably where you're going to find black ice, because the sun isn't able to warm up that moisture, and it will if the temperature is below 0, it will be a sheet of ice. So something to consider. And so if you're hitting black ice, don't use your brakes, because that'll cause you to slip. Don't try to turn. Don't try to turn off of the black ice. Just coast through it. Don't try to accelerate. Don't apply power. Like, don't apply extra power to your pedals. Try to keep as smooth and as still as possible, and just allow yourself to roll over that black ice. That's the safest thing to do. Because if you try to fight it, it'll just get worse. Any other thoughts about black ice?
Well, the other thing in terms of avoiding it is if you do have an option of riding down trails and things that are gravel, one of the good things about gravel is you never get black ice. So, you know, there's portions of the Lochside Trail, for example, that are gravel. And in some ways, those are better during the winter because you don't have to worry about black ice in those portions.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so riding in snow. I did this for 20 years, so there's a few little hints here and there. You know, I like to say start slowly, because your body will be a little chilly if you're dressed properly and you don't want to, you know, like stress your joints. When you're riding in snow, just like riding in black ice, but pedal nice and smoothly. Keep your body and arm nice and relaxed. You'll find that if you're riding in snow that's fresh and a little thick, your front wheel is going to want to wiggle around a little bit, and so that's okay. You know, it's okay to let your front wheel wiggle a little bit. Yeah, if you try to fight it too much, your bike might start to fishtail and swerve out of your way. It's always great. Cars are great. Their tires are big and heavy and wide, so cars tend to plow a nice little, you know, 1 foot wide section of clear road for you. So I try to ride in the car tracks of automobiles. Makes a big difference. And when I said earlier, try and give yourself 30% more time. Yeah, give yourself a bit more time, ride a bit more slowly. If you ride more slowly, you'll just have better traction in all situations. And if your bike does have gears, I would suggest shifting on a regular basis, because what's funny is that the snow will start to ice up, and when it starts to ice up in your gears, it starts to jam your gears and jams your rear derailleur, so it stops shifting altogether. So if you shift your gears on a regular basis, just up and down, here and there, it'll keep your whole system moving. But overall, I personally love riding in wintertime. I love how quiet it is. I love the feel of hard pack beneath my tires. It's like riding on a cloud. It's really quite nice. So we're kind of talking about black ice kind of being the #1, you know, danger. But there's also things that you need to be aware of, such as like slippery surfaces, things that might not appear to be slippery, but they are. So painted lines on the road, they are slippery. Someone noted riding on the trestle. And as Todd said, those wooden ties do get slippery because of the moisture that accumulates on them. Leaves tend to have layers of moisture between them, and they also tend to get moldy as they're decomposing, so they can be very slippery. And then any metal surface, whether that's a sewer grate or a train track, those metal surfaces, when they are cold and wet, and they also accumulate ice, it's very difficult for your tires to maintain traction on those. I would also recommend, if possible, avoid riding into snowbanks or snow drifts, and avoid riding through puddles, ride around puddles, because when there's a snow drift or there's a puddle, you can't see what's in that puddle. You can't see what's in that snow drift. You could be hitting an object, you could be hitting a large pothole, and that could cause you to lose control of your bike or fall. So these are just things I wanted to note. And then another thing is, if you see a snowdrift coming across the road or across the trail, be aware that the reason why the snow is drifting across there is because there's going to be probably a bit of a wind tunnel, and just so brace yourself for that wind tunnel. So here we are, braking and turning. Yeah.
Yeah, so braking and turning, again, I think as Adam mentioned, there's no way you can brake as quickly in cold or wet conditions as you do during sort of normal riding conditions. You do have to allow more distance, don't follow other riders as quickly. Using a bit more of the rear brake is always a good idea, although it's, probably most conditions good to use both brakes kind of equally. If you know you're on a slippery surface like black ice, then try to just sort of let yourself sort of roll through it, and then try to turn or brake when you get to the end of that. And again, turning, just try to make sure that you're not doing anything too sudden. And again, if you slow down well ahead of time and take your turns, I guess smoothly might be a good word, then you're less likely to get into trouble. And again, here's an example of a great turn signal. And because it is dark and wet and all that stuff, you have to communicate with other road users even better. And of course, if there's snow, it also covers up any lane markings, including bike lanes and anything else. So you just have to be conscious of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and one little thing I noted is my bad habit from years of riding road bikes is I like to lean into my corners. Well, if you're dealing with a situation where your traction isn't the best, you don't want to lean into those corners because you might just flop over. Something that actually one of the attendees noted was they watch for weather. They watch the weather forecast a few days in advance. And so they're saying that if it's been really wet and kind of rainy, and then there's a cold snap, they know to be extra careful, or they plan an alternate way of getting around because they know if there's going to be a cold snap, chances are there's going to be ice. But if it's been largely dry and then there's a cold snap, they know they don't have much to worry about. I thought that was a cool point. So locking up and storing your bike in the wintertime.
Yeah, the two kind of scenarios here. And again, my experience is more in wet weather. So my experience in in riding in wet weather is that it's been good to keep my bike indoors as much as I can, because it avoids rusting and it gives the bike a chance to dry out sort of between rides. If you have a parkade available either at work or in your place of residence, or there's 5 city-owned parkades downtown that all have bike parking, and they're all free for anybody riding a bike. So that gives you a great, well-lit, dry place to lock up your bike. And again, when you get home, it's a good idea to wipe off whatever you can, and to avoid any sort of rust in the chain in particular. And I'll let Adam speak to the advice for snowy weather.
Yeah, my very counterintuitive advice. Todd and I had a whole conversation about this. So this is just my opinion, and you don't have to take it with a grain of salt. But in my experience, where we had 5 months of, like back in Thunder Bay, we had freezing weather from mid-November until early March, and it was consistently below zero the whole time. And I found that in terms of minimizing wear and tear on my bike, I found, and so I was riding in snow every day, got salt and snow getting in on my chain and my gears every single day. I found it actually easier to maintain my bike if I kept it outside basically the whole winter, so that snow and ice and salt couldn't melt on a daily basis and get inside my bike. And so what I did was I just kept it outside for, let's say, 2 weeks at a time. And then when I needed to oil my chain, I'd bring my bike in, I would dry it off, I would clean that chain really well, re-lube it, and throw my bike back outside into the cold winter. I found that worked really well in terms of maintaining it. But I totally hear what you're saying. If you're dealing with a situation where it's sub-zero one day and then it's +5 the next day and it's hovering around that zero mark, it certainly makes more sense to keep it inside and making sure you're drying it on a regular basis, because it really just comes down to what reduces the wear and tear and exposure on your gear and your chain. So I mean that's it, I think, in terms of the content for winter riding. But of course we want to hear, we've got 5 minutes for questions. Of course we want to hear your questions, and I think Justine would like to talk about a couple other little topics here.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly promote Bike to Work's Bike Skills program. We actually would have done a in-person workshop on all this, but obviously COVID makes that impossible. So we're really lucky that we have this kind of new webinar series to be able to still do skills sharing. If you're looking for more hands-on or on bike courses, we are still running those, obviously with COVID protocols, and we have a few coming up. So if you want to check out our website, bikeworkvictoria.ca/bikeskills, that they're all listed there. And yeah, I'm sorry we're running out of time for questions, but there were a few things that I was hoping we could get to. We had a question earlier in the webinar from Kiego, which is for Todd, and they're asking, why should we never use a blinking front light?
Oh, it's easy, because it blinds anyone who's oncoming. You can kind of try it in your own driveway, prop your bike against something, turn your front light on to flashing, then walk 50 yards away and walk towards it, and you'll see that it's very problematic, and that'll probably convince you to never do it. So.
Right. I have another question about tires, and either of you can jump on this one. How do you know which tires have a softer rubber, and are marathon tires good for winter conditions?
That's a great question. Actually, I ride on Schwalbe marathon tires. I found those have been one of the very best ones, and I've ridden on the Marathon Supremes. My studded tires were Marathons, and then I have a version of that on my e-bike as well. So those have worked out super well and are a good example of the kind of thing that's very suitable in the winter.
Yeah, I totally agree, Todd. I have ridden Marathons for over a decade, and I love them.
And the softer rubber? How do we know which ones have softer rubbers?
Well, generally speaking, any quality tire is going to have somewhat softer rubber. And again, touring tires will tend to, mountain bike tires. You can certainly always ask the people you're buying them from. And the kinds of things that will have hard rubber are primarily road bike tires that are sort of designed for summer use. And again, if you have slick tires or tires on your road bike, I would take a close look at that. And again, things like cyclocross tires, for example, are almost always soft. So.
Yep, I agree with Todd there. Yep. It's really kind of, mountain bike tires are designed to have a bit more grip. Same thing as cyclocross tires. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Any more questions? Oh, at the beginning of the webinar, we also got, I thought you were not to wear a hat under your helmet as it adjusts the fit of the helmet. Also, if a visor is stuck or a visor is struck, the helmet flies back. This is about, head warmth under your helmet. What would you suggest?
Well, I think the thing that I would look at is I would try my helmet on, and again, if I can get a proper fit with a thin cap of some kind underneath it, then that's absolutely, I don't think that compromises your safety at all. But on the other hand, if you can't get a proper fit with the cap underneath your helmet, then you either need a thinner cap or a different helmet. And again, at the end of the day, your helmet fit is absolutely the paramount concern. And so if you can't find some combination that still fits properly, then I would forego that suggestion and maybe look at a helmet cover or something like that.
All right, thank you, Todd. It's the end of the webinar. We're at 1 o'clock. So thank you all for attending today. This is really exciting. This is our first webinar since Go by Bike Week in the fall. And we're hoping to do more again this year. Keep cycling. Like the slide says, it's not too late to sign up if you haven't already logged your rides for Winter Bike to Work Day today. Thank you so much for attending the webinar. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and our webinar will be posted on our website at biketoworkvictoria.ca and our resources. You can check out also all the other winter cycling resources we have on our resource library. Thank you all so much. And any other questions you can send to me, Justine at biketowork.ca, or you'll see my email also finding out who our lucky winner is of this webinar draw. Thank you so much as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.